All right, everyone, welcome to the second Salary Commission meeting. I'm going to go ahead and start our presentation, which is what I usually do, but didn't forget to start it this time. Give me one sec. This thing. Everyone see that now? Okay, we are good to go. Amber, take it away.
Great. Thank you so much. As Jamie mentioned, welcome everyone. For those of you that are listening online, welcome to the second Independent District Commission meeting. Today is April 11th. We'll be meeting tonight from 6 to 8 p.m. The Independent Salary Commission wants to thank you, the community members that are watching, and leaders who are watching. They value your input and your feedback. So I'm going to turn the meeting over now to Liam, who is going to walk through the Zoom logistics so that we can get started.
Thanks, Amber. This meeting is being recorded for later viewing. A copy of this recording will be posted on the Salary Commission website under past meetings and events. For today's meeting, we have closed captioning available. To access closed captioning, click on the closed caption button on the bottom right side of your screen. We also have ASL and Spanish interpretation available at this meeting. You can access this feature through the interpretation button located on the menu controls at the bottom of your screen. Victor, one of our Spanish interpreters, can explain with further details. Victor, if you want to chime in.
I think he explained in the chat. He's already in the other room.
Well, my apologies. So if you look at the chat function, there should be instructions on how to utilize the interpretation function. Commissioners, please change your chat settings to everyone so that our folks listening in today can follow along. And just a heads up that your chat is also part of the public record. Community members listening in, we have the Zoom Q&A feature available. Feel free to submit questions or comments through there. We may not be able to answer all the questions today, but they will become part of the public meeting record. At today's meeting, we won't be taking verbal public comment, but you can submit public comments through our comment form online on our website or by emailing transition@portlandoregon.gov. Be on the lookout for future public comment opportunities on our website. And again, I just want to remind anyone viewing this meeting that we do have interpretation, Spanish and ASL available for you.
Thanks, Liam. So commissioners, thank you so much for the opportunity to facilitate these sessions with you. I'm Amber Ontiveros. I'm the owner of Ontiveros and Associates. We are a policy development firm located here in Portland, Oregon. We do coalition building, and we also specialize in change management around equity. And it's really a privilege to be working and serving with you today. So during this portion of the presentation, I'm going to walk through the agenda. So we're going to spend the first half of our meeting, covering commission business, adopting the minutes, receiving a public meeting training from the city attorney, and then we'll hear some data and based on some of the research questions that you had asked Barb to obtain for this meeting. And then later in the meeting, we're going to discuss the commissioner's roles and also discuss the work plan of this really important work. And we're going to finish out our meeting by workshopping some of the foundational documents that you had received in your meeting packet for today's meeting. If you can go to the next slide, Liam. So in your packet, you received a copy of the March 28th meeting minutes, and I hope everyone had a chance to review those. There were any meeting minutes. Does anyone have any edits, any thoughts or suggestions in terms of changes to the meeting minutes?
Just adding my gratitude for such good minutes. Thank you so much. Was that Barb?
Sorry, that was Tony McCasker, who is a classification and compensation analyst with the class comp team for the city of Portland. So yeah, we're very proud of Tony's excellent work.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Martinez Salicea. Are there any other changes or suggestions from the commissioners? Okay, if not, it sounds like we'll approve the minutes as they're written. Also in your packet was a public comment report. You received 3 comments and 1 letter from the League of Women Voters. Does anyone have any questions or comments or care to reflect on those, either the comments or the letter from the League?
I appreciated their feedback. It felt important, I guess, interesting information just to think through. I appreciated their call out of the mayor's position changing and indicating that they feel it's not necessarily getting smaller or should be paid less. I think that's something that's definitely been on my mind, is how these shifts in government are impacting the roles, the level of responsibility, the duties that are under each position. So I appreciated their call out and attention to that.
Great feedback. Anyone else?
Commissioners, I will say that you'll have noticed that we didn't receive very much public comment. That is likely to change very soon. And so that public comment report will just kind of build off of itself. So you have a kind of cumulative report with all the public comment that comes in from now on. In future meetings, this is probably going to be a good, I think, task for the co-chair or one of the co-chairs to review those materials, summarize them, and provide an explanation and lead a conversation with the commission.
Yes, and I'll just add one other thing. I know that based on the survey that you all had participated in, I know quite a few of you are really keenly interested in the engagement framework, in which case this is a great opportunity to, take the input from the community and then utilize it in the way that you embody your work as part of your values. So just wanted to offer that as well. If I hear no other thoughts or comments, I'll move to the city attorney to give training on the public meeting law.
Thank you. My name is Maya Hayam. I'm with the City Attorney's Office, and I've been staffing Charter Commission for a little over 2 years now, and all things related to charter transition. So I'm really happy to be here to continue that work and really appreciate the volunteers who are serving on the commission. Thank you very much. And I'm going to be going through a significant number of legal issues. And if you're feeling overwhelmed, that's great. That's exactly how you should feel. This is not meant to make you a subject matter expert on anything. It's simply to put a little bit of a tickle in the back of your head if any of these issues pop up and you need to work with my office. Just feel free to reach out to Jamie and we will work with you. So this is, again, just to put that little tickle in the back of your mind that as you're going through your work, there might be an issue for you that you want to raise with my office. So next slide, please. And next slide. Okay, so the agenda, and typically this can take 1 hour. I'm gonna do it at lightning speed and try to get through it because I know you have a lot of substantive work. But in short, we're gonna talk about what exactly is a public official and why are you considered public officials? What is a public meeting? How do we handle public records? And then legal ethics. Next slide. So the public official is really a service as a public trust, and we need to comply with all applicable laws to safeguard that trust. And the local government is really the level of government that enjoys the most trust with its residents, particularly when compared with the federal government. Now that has really taken a beating in the last few years. And that's why it is really, really important for all of us to hold ourselves to a high standard in all of these areas of law that we're going to be discussing. Next slide. So who exactly is a public official? Well, when we think of an elected official, that's really the obvious one, right? Everybody knows the mayor and the councilors are public officials. So are appointed officials. And so that would include all of the commissioners on this call. That is why you are considered a public official who must comply with legal standards. Excuse me, someone's at my door. Willow, can you get that and tell, who is it? Please ask them to come back. Fun and Zoom times, right? And so employees, I'm an employee. I am, no, please, we're fine. Okay. And agents, next slide, please. Okay, so we're going to talk about public meetings now. And what is the policy behind a public meeting? It's essentially that the organ form of government requires an informed public aware of the deliberations, so the conversations leading up to the decisions and decisions of governing bodies, and you, the Salary Commission, are a governing body, and the information upon which such decisions are made. So the information would be considered things like the public comments that you'll receive, the informational packets that are sent to you in advance of each meeting. The public is entitled to understand how its government is making decisions. There are three issues or three goalposts that trigger a public meeting. The first one is a quorum required. So you have a commission of 5. A quorum is 3 commissioners. So anytime 3 commissioners are together to deliberate, and that means to discuss and debate on any matter. And some people get confused because they think, well, what about a social event? If we were to have a happy hour, nobody mentioned anything about the work of the Salary Commission. Would that be a public meeting? And the answer is no, because you don't have the first criteria triggered, which is a quorum required. Any number of commissioners could go to happy hour, and the happy hour could happen. It's not dependent on a quorum, whereas this meeting could not go forward unless there were 3 of the commissioners making a quorum. Next slide, please. So here is an example of public meetings. So regularly scheduled meetings like the one we're currently in emergency meetings, so something called without the standard public notice. A full commission meeting with the sole purpose to gather information to serve as a basis for a subsequent decision or recommendation of the commission, unless the exclusive purpose of the subcommittee is to gather and report information to the full committee. Now, I've underlined report. That's an important distinction. And if you look at the next bullet point, a subcommittee meeting, if the subcommittee has authority to make recommendations or decisions. So if the subcommittee is meeting exclusively to gather information and report, not a public meeting. If a subcommittee is meeting to gather information, report, and make a recommendation to the full commission, then you have a public meeting, and all of the requirements we'll talk about in a moment are triggered. And thank you. I don't know who made the beware email and reply all like really huge. That's excellent. That is the biggest way that people trigger an inadvertent public meeting. And that's because in 2023, we're all so accustomed to email and you reply all, and that's really how we do business. The problem is if you have those communications with each other, the public is really cut out of those deliberations, those conversations. So it's really important. This is the one area of public meeting that's the easiest to trip up. And I should have asked Jamie beforehand, did the city give each of the commissioners a City of Portland email address?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So the best way to handle public records, and actually let me hold on off on my comment and advance the slide. So here are some examples of things that are not public meetings. A training session like this one, if no substantive issues are discussed. So the second we start talking about anything substantive, this would stop being a training and it would become a public meeting. Obviously, we're having it within the public meeting, so this training will also be part of the record. But if it were exclusively a meeting about training that did not discuss substantive issues, not a public meeting. Again, a social event, happy hour, no problem, provided that you don't start chatting about the work of the commission, which can be hard to do. Feel free to invite me and I'll tell you to stop talking about anything related to the commission. Next slide, please. Okay, if we have a public meeting, here are the things that are required. Notice with agenda must be held within the city of Portland at a non-discriminatory site, must be accessible to persons with disabilities. The public must be able to attend either virtually, in person, typically a hybrid is where we're all moving to after the pandemic. The official actions must be taken by a public vote. Again, the public is entitled to understand how government is working, and minutes must be taken. And the good news is that you as commissioners do not have to worry about handling any of those requirements. City staff take care of all of those issues for you. Next slide, please. Oh, good. Any questions on public meetings? I should have mentioned at the top, I'm very interruptible, so you don't feel the need to hold on any questions. Okay, let's race through to public records. Next slide, please. So the public record policy is very similar to the one about public meetings. Every person in Oregon has the right to inspect any non-exempt public record of a public body. Again, the Salary Commission is a public body. And I won't read you that definition of a public record, but it is incredibly broad and it does not necessarily include only things like written paper documents. Next slide, please. So here is a list of everything that's a public record. Paper documents, obvious, that's what everybody thinks about. Photographs, maps, emails. And here's where I wanted to talk about the email address. You do not want to send any emails from your personal account to conduct Salary Commission business. If we get a public records request and someone says, I think we have a commissioner who was conducting city business on their personal email, one of two things will happen. My office will contact you and ask you to fill out an affidavit swearing that you've never done business on your personal email account, and that should stop the issue. Or if there is a judge or a court feels there's a reasonable risk that you have conducted personal business, someone in my office is going to be able to potentially look through to confirm that you in fact have not done public business on your personal email account. So make sure you're using those city email addresses. Text messages, chats in the Zoom or Teams meeting. I was really happy to hear that announcement at the top, Liam. Thank you. That's rarely stated at the top of a meeting, and it's absolutely true that anything in the chat is part of the public record, and voicemails until deleted will be a public record. Next slide. Things that are not public records, transitory records, things like, hey, are there donuts in the break room? Really not going to apply to you guys. Emails, if the only content is personal. So even if you have sent an email to the rest of the commissioners about the happy hour, that will not necessarily be a public record. And then we have materials that are just excluded from the law. So for example, personal privacy exemption might be one that comes up for the Salary Commission. Again, I don't think this will really impact your work too much. But personal privacy exemption is one that might come up as you're gathering information about class comp, et cetera. Next slide, please.
Can I ask a quick question? I'm sorry to interrupt. Going back on a slide, all the communications that we had before we received our city email address, which were largely sort of the initial information gathering and responses, are all those were all in our personal emails. Is there Jamie, do you have some way of, did you sort of isolate that? Or I don't think, from my perspective, nothing would have particularly triggered any concern, but those were originally on our personal email. So could you maybe speak to that a little bit? Not that, I think it's a problem yet, but I'm curious.
Well, what I would do if I were you, commissioners, I would just take all of those emails and put them in a very specific folder. So then you can say, but for this time period when we hadn't been issued our public email yet, all of it, everything that related to the commission's work is in this folder. That should be sufficient. And then if you are sending things to city staff, that's always a good idea, because then Jamie's going to be able to turn everything over, and we hopefully will not have to contact any of the commissioners, and you just let us, the staff, handle those for you.
That's right. And there was no deliberations that happened. It was all onboarding, one-on-ones, those kinds of communications.
Thank you.
Next slide, please. Okay, so this is really the meat of the presentation. But again, I think that it's unlikely that you guys will be faced with any of these issues. So let's walk through them. And if you feel differently, let's have a conversation. So the policy behind the legal ethics statutes are that we have restrictions placed on us. It doesn't matter if you're the mayor, a salary commissioner, or an employee, that are different than the public because we serve the public. And our service is a public trust. So we must comply with legal ethics that ordinary residents do not have to worry about. And I want to stress this, that compliance is the personal responsibility of each commissioner. So if you think you have a problem or an issue that you see coming up, please call Jamie and get her involved with working with my office. We do not represent anyone after a complaint is filed with the Ethics Commission, because that is the personal responsibility of each public official. However, I'm happy to provide advice before a complaint is filed. Not anticipating any complaints, just want everyone to be aware of the requirements. And there are two sets of requirements you need to be aware of. The first are the Oregon legal requirements that are set out in statute and enforced by the Oregon Ethics Commission. And the second set are the Portland City Code of Ethics, which largely mirrors, but is a little more restrictive than the state requirements. Next slide, please. Oh, so this slide is obviously a little bit out of place. Any questions on public records before we dip our toes into legal ethics? Okay, next slide, please. And next slide again. Okay, as I mentioned earlier, the state statutes are implemented and enforced by a state regulatory agency. Their jurisdiction goes back 4 years. The list of possible sanctions you can read for yourselves. The vast majority of the time, in fact, I think I've only seen civil penalties 3 times in the last handful of years. Really, it would be a letter of reprimand, explanation, or education. Unless you are willfully violating any of the rules we're about to talk about, you're really very unlikely to be looking at civil penalties. So inadvertent mistakes, typically a letter of reprimand. Okay, next slide. So who must you consider when you're complying with legal ethics? And this is a really important lens that most people don't think of when they're thinking about their own compliance, because you obviously think about yourself, right? Like, I am a public employee, therefore I'm a public official. I must comply with all of these rules. You yourselves are commissioners. It's easy to think about yourself. However, that isn't the only set of individuals you must consider. The second set are relatives of the public official. And I came up with something I call the Thanksgiving rule, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. And the third category is a business with whom you or a relative of yourself is associated. And we're going to unpack all of those. Next slide, please. Okay, this is what I call the Thanksgiving rule. So if you close your eyes and you imagine all the people who are sitting around your Thanksgiving table, some of them you want there, some of you might not. That's irrelevant. It's a really long list, and you can see that list on the side. But I'm going to focus your attention to the bottom bullet, because that's really the criteria. Any individual from whom the public official receives benefits arising from that individual's employment. So if you are divorced and you're receiving alimony or child support, there are financial benefits flowing back and forth between you as individuals. I take care of dependents. I therefore have to consider them when I am working through the rules. And the legal ethics really care primarily about financial interests, and not necessarily about what we might as humans think of as a larger ethic or moral compass. The legal statutory ethics really are focused on finances. And we'll talk about that as we move on to the next slide. Oh, but before we do that, the third category is if you are associated with a business, and there are a few different categories of businesses. If it is a privately held business, you are associated with that business if you are a director, officer, owner, or employee, or you own $1,000 in stock or interest in that privately held company. If it's a publicly held company, AT&T or Target, you have an association with that business if you own $100,000 in stock or interest, and also congratulations. It does not apply to public bodies, and it does not apply to tax-exempt 501c3 nonprofits if your only association is as a board member or an unpaid position. If you are an employee, then you have a business relationship with that nonprofit. Next slide, please. We're going to talk about the, so that's sort of the background. Who's a public official? What do you have to be worried about when you're going through these three different categories of statutes? Those three categories are use of position, gifts, and conflict of interest. Next slide, please. So the use of position rule is you may not use or attempt to use your official position as a salary commissioner to obtain a financial gain or avoid a financial detriment if the financial opportunity is not otherwise available to the public. And I always throw some examples in here because that really helps clarify the rule. So you might have remembered the car wash example with the Portland firefighters, and they were using the city's car wash that we have for our fleet on their personal vehicles, and it was not an official part of their compensation. And so that was a violation of the use of position ethic rules. Now, recently, the Portland City Council included that perk as part of an official compensation package for firefighters. So that perk is now considered under the City of Portland part of the official compensation, and therefore an exception to the use of position rule. But you can, I think it still helps illustrate that I did not have access to that even as a member of or an employee of the City of Portland. So if I want to get my car washed, I have to take it to a commercial car wash and pay, or make my kids do it and use water, which might drive up my water bill. So that would be using my, if I were to figure out a loophole and how I could also use that car wash that the city owns, and no other member of the public could use it, that will be a violation. What's not a violation is if by virtue of your position as a salary commissioner, you get a Columbia store pass for 20% off Columbia. And this actually happens on a rotating basis for all City of Portland employees. But we don't get it because we are a City of Portland employee. We get it because we're paid workers who have money to spend. And stores like Columbia and Nike, they sort of rotate through large employers in the area and provide these passes. So it doesn't, we're not receiving that benefit by virtue of our public employment. We're merely receiving it by virtue of our employment. It's a little bit challenging for me to consider a fact pattern where use of position would be ever triggered by the salary commission. But I want you guys to be aware of all the rules. Next slide, please. So the use of position also has some restrictions on private employment. We're just going to race through this. I don't think it will apply to you. You may not use confidential information obtained through your position as a salary commissioner. You can take no official action that could financially impact your private employment. You must disclose all conflicts of interest. We'll talk about what that is later. You must ensure a clear distinction between use of resources and time for private employment and your action as a public official. And you may not directly or indirectly solicit or accept a promise of future employment based on the understanding that the employment offer is influenced by the public official's vote. So that's an interesting one. I can imagine somebody who is a candidate for office coming to you and saying, hey, if you vote for a $500,000 salary for each commissioner, you can be my chief of staff. That would be an inappropriate use of position and a violation of the rule. Any questions on those? Okay, next slide, please. So gifts, I love this one because I've been doing public employment law for a very long time and I've never been offered a gift. But maybe that will be different for you. Okay, so the rule, this is the state rule, which is a little bit more flexible than the city's rule, is that during a calendar year, a public official like a salary commissioner may not solicit or receive directly or indirectly any gifts with an aggregate value in excess of $50 from a single source that could reasonably be known to have a legislative or administrative interest in a decision or vote made by a public official. And a gift is anything of economic value if it's given for less value than is required from others who are not public officials. A legislative or administrative interest is defined as an economic interest distinct from the general public. So again, potential candidates all have legislative or administrative interests in the work of this commission. And a decision or vote is defined as any act that commits the commission to a particular course of action. So if the commission is merely making a recommendation in an advisory capacity, then this would not apply. Next slide, please. There are some exclusions. There's a food and beverage exclusion. And I'm really struggling to think of how this would impact the work you're doing, but if it does, Jamie and I will be in touch. And I'm not going to go through that expensive bike example because it doesn't really apply to the work of the commission. Next slide, please. Okay, conflicts of interest. The rule behind conflict of interest is that a public official, such as a salary commissioner, is met with a conflict when you are participating in an official action that could result in a financial benefit or detriment to the public official. And I think that the Charter Commission did a good job of identifying who was not eligible for participation on this commission to get rid of this potential for conflicts of interest. So no employees of the city, no candidates who have filed who would clearly have a financial interest in setting the salary for the position for which they intend to run. And so those are really, again, it's not clear to me that you will be met with a conflict of interest because I think the commission was really set up to avoid that. But I still want to talk about this. So if it does happen or you are worried about it, again, just in the back of your mind, there's a little antenna that goes up. Reach out and talk to Jamie and let's figure it out together. And let's talk a little bit more about what that might mean. Next slide, please.
A quick question.
You have a potential conflict of interest. And there are two different, I should say, there are two different types of.
Maya,
Yes.
Maya?
I apologize. There's a question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, shout, like I get going.
Okay, sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay. On the conflicts of interest, because not all candidates have come forward, I could imagine a situation in which we do this work and then someone in our networks or spheres of influence end up running. Given that we don't know what's to come on that front, would we just talk to you once that's known, or like, how do you do conflicts of interest in retrospect?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So the only time that this would impact you legally, and remember these are legal conflicts of interest, would be if that individual who intends to run is falls under the Thanksgiving rule, or it wouldn't be a business with which you are associated because obviously businesses don't run for elected office. So it really would be if somebody becomes a candidate and you believe they may fall under that Thanksgiving rule, let's discuss. Okay, next slide, please. So again, conflicts of interest can either be potential or actual. And a potential conflict of interest is a financial effect of an action is unknown because it might happen and it might not. So a great example of we know we're going to have candidates. They may have a connection to you, they may not. You don't know. But because this is so general, I don't think a general blanket potential conflict of interest statement is required at this point. But if there was somebody who had said to you, and they were part of the Thanksgiving rule, you know, I'm really considering running for office, then you might have a potential conflict of interest because they might run, they might not, they're considering it. And then you must take a very specific action, which is to publicly announce that potential conflict of interest on each occasion before taking action, meaning before a vote, et cetera. So that's for potential conflicts of interest. If you have an individual who has then said, I filed my paperwork for election, then you have a potential conflict of interest that has ripened into an actual conflict of interest. Remember, that's only if they fall within that statutory definition of relative, and you're looking for some kind of financial hook that flows between you, like for your parent or your spouse or your child or someone of that nature. And if you have an actual conflict of interest, and I'm looking at the second bullet here, you must publicly announce the actual conflict of interest on each occasion and then refrain from participating in any discussion, debate, or voting on the issue out of which the actual conflict arises. Again, this body was chosen with some guidelines to really hopefully exclude anybody who's going to have an obvious conflict of interest. If you think there might be a potential conflict of interest bubbling up there, happy to chat about that and make sure everything is above board. Next slide, please. Oh, great. Questions on legal ethics? Okay, next slide. I just wanted to give you this information. If you're feeling overwhelmed, particularly about the legal ethics, these are two great resources. The first one is the Attorney General's Public Records and Meetings Manual. It's like 500 pages, so feel free to, you know, a little light reading before you go to bed. There's a PDF link there. The second one is information for the Oregon Government Ethics Commission. They have a website. They also have training webinars that are focused on very specific topics. Many of them are on demand. So if you're feeling like, ooh, I really want to understand conflicts of interest more, that's a great website to go to. You can either take one of the training webinars. They also have a guide for public officials with some more examples. And those examples are great to really help flesh out exactly how the rules play out in the real world. Okay, next slide. Okay, that's it. Thank you so much for listening. Again, I know that's just kind of like vomiting a bunch of legal stuff at you. So absolutely remember, we are here to help you. You're not alone. If you at any point have any questions or concerns, or even just you think I'm 95% sure I'm fine, but I just want to get to that 100%, do not hesitate. Reach out to Jamie, and she and I are going to work with you to make sure you feel confident about the work you're doing on behalf of the city. And again, thank you for that work.
Great. Thank you so much, Ms. Hyam. Liam, can you go to the next slide?
Amber, just so you know, I'm the one advancing the slides.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Okay,
Maya.
thank you. So now we're going to have the portion of the presentation that I'm sure all of you are really excited about, which is Barb is going to present some of the research that she had gathered based on your last meeting and the request. So I'm going to turn it over to Barb. Thank you, Jamie.
Thank you, Amber. Good evening, everyone. I also want to note that the research that we provided came from the entire PHR City of Portland class comp team. So we were very excited to do this work for you. Last week, you received our written response to your requests for research and information. So you should have a robust amount of detail in those materials. But I wanted to be sure today that you sort of had a thorough understanding of that information. And so I will quickly go through your questions and the research, kind of summary of the research that we found, or the information that we found, and give you an opportunity to ask questions, or if we misunderstood something, would absolutely like a chance to provide for you what you were expecting. So one of the requests from this body was to ask about tools and resources that might be available to help guide this work using an equity lens. And we did some research to see what we could find out in the world about applying the principles of equity and inclusion in compensation work. So we found information mostly about equitable pay around existing salary structures and individual employees. So there were many companies who, consultants who you can hire to ensure that your current pay structure and your current workforce is being paid equitably. Lots of tools to analyze demographics. But what we didn't find was robust information about how to build pay structures. So those structures in which you pay individual people. There was not a robust amount of information there. We found information about best practices for creating pay structures, and the materials that we provided did have some sort of processes and methods to use, but typically we're talking about an objective external source to base your pay structures on, like a market source. So I think that wasn't quite what the commission was looking for. We are happy to hear of any sources that this body might like us to investigate further. We also have a request out to one of our associates, an organization that helps us, the city, conduct pay equity audits on our audit schedule. So we're waiting to see if they have any information or resources. But at this date, unfortunately, we'll have to continue to look. And again, happy to hear of any guidance that the commission would like to provide for us to do some more digging. You also ask about the duties that our electeds have around engagement with marginalized communities, and ask us to take a look and see what other electeds or what other comparable duties we might find out in the world among other elected officials. So we went to look at municipalities that are about the same population size as the city of Portland, to look and see if we could find duties of elected officials in those jurisdictions. We were unable to uncover any job descriptions for elected officials in those 10 organizations. And similarly, the city doesn't have job descriptions for elected officials that kind of point to any sorts of engagement, community engagement, equity duties as well. And this is, I think, because typically the roles of elected officials are outside of an organization's classification and compensation structure. So different roles and rules for elected officials than regular employees. So for this assignment, we came up short and unfortunately don't have much to share there. Next slide. You ask us about budget creation at the City of Portland, and in summary, the City Budget Office begins the process and collects information, ultimately provides that to the Mayor's Office, at which the Mayor creates a proposed budget, which then goes before the City Council to vote on and approve. So there is a formal structured process, and you should have the details in those materials we provided last week. You also ask how pay is set for elected officials and when was the last pay adjustment. So that was an interesting assignment. We didn't find sort of a nice narrative to explain historically how pay has been set for our elected officials, and instead we're pulling information out of ordinances from 1934. But what we did sort of discover in summary is that prior to 2019, for at least the last 10 years, 2009 to 2019, elected officials had the option to apply an annual COLA adjustment, cost of living increase to their pay. So we're not sure how that pay got established, but they did have the option to increase that by a cost of living amount every year. Some officials did choose to do that. Some did not choose to have the COLA increase applied to their pay. But starting in 2019, that practice of choosing to apply a cost of living increase was abandoned. So there have been no pay adjustments since 2019 for our elected officials. Next slide, please. Then you ask how COLA is calculated. Sorry, the cost of living adjustments are calculated for represented and non-represented employees. It is based on the federal government's Consumer Price Index data, which is released cyclically, and all of our unions, all of our collective bargaining agreements do require an annual adjustment based on the Consumer Price Index figure. And no matter how low that figure is, there must be at least a minimum of a 1% increase, but there can be no more than a 5% increase on an annual basis. And for non-represented employees, the COLA rates are approved through the annual budget process, and typically these would mirror whatever rate the unions were receiving for that fiscal year. Next slide, please. Another subject of interest for the commission was the structure of the offices of our elected officials, and you have more detail in your materials about those positions and structures, but in summary, the auditor has a relatively unique structure staffed to carry out the mission of the auditor's office. The mayor and commissioner's offices do have some positions that are the same: administrative support positions, staff representative positions. But then there are also some positions that are found distinctly in the mayor's office and some in the commissioner's office. And all of those are distinct classifications with descriptions and pay rates assigned that are in the materials that were provided to you last week, as well as can be found online. And one question that you ask us about the percentage of the budget that each office represents is something that we are waiting for information on, and I hope to have that information to you for our next meeting in 2 weeks. And next slide, please. We also ask about benefits of our elected officials, and so they are very similar to what regular non-represented employees receive. They do receive paid parking. They are part of the PERS system, the Public Employee Retirement System, which provides a pension. Next slide, please. And then finally, you ask about what other comparable cities might we look at. We looked at cities by population size. That was the particular request. And so here is a list of 10 cities that are similar to Portland in size, 5 that are slightly smaller and 5 slightly larger. And then we looked for information about salary commissions in these cities and found one. Baltimore does have a salary commission, but it does not appear that any of the other jurisdictions have a salary commission. We're waiting for confirmation on a few of them, but it does not appear that any of them besides Baltimore do employ a commission. So that was the extent of our research. Is there anything I can clarify? Anything you would like more information on? Anything we missed or you would like us to do some more digging on?
This is Maura Cooney. I was curious, I know that the compensation committee for Baltimore has not been formed just yet, but I'm wondering if it might be possible to get a little bit more information on that, if that's something that our group needs to do or somebody else. But I am curious to see what they're doing for Baltimore as well, if that might be informative for us or not.
Absolutely.
So Barb, following that, I have Commissioner Martinez Alicea, Commissioner Sampson, and did I miss anyone? Nope, I think that's first.
Great. Commissioner Martinez Alicea?
Thank you. So I see that this is a slide version, and we received a PDF version. I just wanted to double check that all the links that I saw in the PDX in the slideshow are in the PDF document, because actually if you can go 1 or 2 slides before. No. Anyway, that is the specific question. Are all the links that are in the slideshow also in the PDF?
Thank you for the question. There is one additional link in your materials. So there is a link to the classification and compensation page in your materials, as well as a link to, there is a link to the classification page, which describes all of the jobs at the City of Portland. And then there was a separate link to the compensation plan that provides a list of the classification titles and the salary ranges. And both of those links are in your materials. And in the slideshow, there's only the link for the the compensation plan, I believe. Jamie, can you scroll down to that, or back up to that? Yes, so this link is a link to the compensation plans. So the actual pay ranges for all of our classifications. But if you go to portland.gov and search human resources, if you click on the classification and compensation tab, you will find both of those sets of data, the classification descriptions and the compensation.
Commissioner Martinez Salasea, did you have a follow-up, and would it be helpful to have the information that Barb just identified to go search if we put together a document that would make that easily accessible?
Thank you for asking. I think the format of the slides is easier for me to digest
Okay.
than the PDF. So if we could have the slideshow, I think that would be easier to process. Thank you.
Absolutely. Commissioner Sampson?
Thank you. And Barb, thank you to you and your team. I know that this is a lot of work on top of your daily workloads to gather information for us. I had a couple follow-up questions or requests for information. So now that we know elected officials have not seen salary adjustments, particularly COLA back to 2019, I was hoping we could see 2019 to now each year what COLA your non-represented staff got. And then I'm also wondering, for the positions that report, specifically like the senior staff representatives, the chief of staff, deputy chief of staff, those specialized roles that are only reporting to elected officials, I'm curious how you set compensation for those jobs. And if you're gathering from comparable market data at other cities, if we could see what cities you look at to price those jobs, that would be really helpful. And then my last question, I'll throw it out there, and I'd be interested to hear from other commissioners, or maybe it's better directed somewhere else. But I'm curious, I know we don't have job descriptions for these bodies of work, but are there elements of the roles that are unique to the city of Portland that would maybe count out any other cities that we might look at in terms of compensation? I know for Multnomah County's salary commission, that's a really big factor. And that's why the pay is tied to internal positions, because our chair and our commissioners do work that's so unique that oftentimes the scope and breadth isn't really captured at other counties. So if there's any knowledge out there, or there are people that we can perhaps invite to our meetings to learn more about the positions, to gain more insight on any parts of the roles that we might not be able to find just looking at other cities and what they pay their elected officials would be helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Martinez Salasea, do you have a follow-up? Great.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Sampson, for these questions. It allows me to even to think further. And regarding the, we don't have a job description because it's an elected position, and the charter, however, has a particular driver, right? Is this increased representation. And those are, if not particular skill sets or perspectives, at least qualifications that can inform what we use to value the position, that is different from what other cities, municipalities, etc., are doing. Maybe there are some places that are having this particular driver for new structures or new compensation for elected officials, but that I think would be wishful thinking. But this is something that I discussed in our early meetings with Barb and Jamie, that perhaps there are some aspects of, if not duties, qualifications that we know drive the spirit of the charter that is about greater representation, particularly of marginalized communities, particularly of communities that have not been traditionally represented in Portland, and how then we calculate value then about those aspects that would allow for not only guidance for compensation, but it could even include some description in a voter's manual, for example, that is guiding to the electoral community.
That's great. We have Commissioner Cooney followed by Commissioner Johnson.
Hi there, thank you. I wanted to apologize for jumping the line earlier. That was my mistake. I'm having all sorts of tech issues tonight, so my apologies for cutting in front of others who are speaking. I think this tags on to some of the earlier ones. I do just want to make sure I'm understanding if there are specific requirements or qualifications currently for those entering into the mayor position or commissioner positions. I understand that there's an education requirement for the auditor. So just curious to find out if there's anything that absolutely has to exist for those folks who are taking on those positions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Johnson followed by Gil.
Thank you. I think we need to be very careful that we don't accidentally or implicitly put requirements into the calculation for the compensation, so that people who might run for office might be eliminated also. It can work in two ways, that if people don't have kind of specific experiences or qualifications, they may feel that they're not eligible to run for the position. So I think we need to be very careful in our deliberations about not putting too much emphasis on what people are expected to do, because everybody's going to they're going to run for office, and we want to encourage them to run for office and have an open mind as to who might fill these positions. And so I want to be careful about that. I think we need to value aspects of what the charter wants the new council members to be able to do with the community, but I also want to make sure we don't accidentally send a message that if you don't have experience doing this or you haven't done that, that somehow you wouldn't be eligible to run for the position. Because I think we want everybody to feel that if they want to run for the position and they have the support of their individual districts, that they're eligible. And so that's just something I wanted to kind of throw into this discussion at this point.
Mr. Johnson, if I may. Oh, Amber, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I just wanted to reply that the Salary Commission does not have any authority to set any criteria for elected officials. I think what I heard Commissioner Martinez Alicea suggesting is that there may be a different set of pay structures that can be established based on the particular characteristics of electeds who get into the job, who are voted into the job, and bring with them a number of characteristics that are helpful to the job. Forgive me if I am misstating that, Commissioner Martinez Alicea, but I just wanted to reiterate that the Salary Commission cannot set qualifications for office.
And I don't think we want to. I mean, I know we can and we shouldn't. I just think it's a very careful line we have to walk so that it doesn't appear as though we are doing that. And that's
Yes.
a concern, that as we look at this and we start to formulate possibilities for compensation, we're just very careful about that messaging, that we don't inadvertently send a signal that we believe that that you need to have these skills in order to run for office, because anybody can run, and indeed we want to encourage as broad a participation as possible. That's part of the reason for all of this.
yeah, I want to reiterate that we're definitely in alignment because that's the spirit of democracy. And that there's some information that would help us identify what is the compensation, the fair compensation, given what we are expecting those individuals to achieve. So that's more of, like Jamie was distinguishing, what are some characteristics and what are some of the things that we're expecting from this elected officials to accomplish. And that has a correlation or indication even to a particular compensation.
Thank you. We have two class commissioners, and we're a bit of overtime on this section. So Commissioner Gill and then Commissioner Angers, if you could go quickly. Thank you.
All right, sure. I just want to thank everybody for the insightful questions. They're very useful for me as a quieter person. So thank you. I wanted to ask about how often the budget is voted on and when these salaries will be part of that budget.
I believe, and Jamie, you might know more than I, but I believe that it's in 2024 that the budget in which these salaries will reside would be voted on, and then they would be implemented in 2025.
I believe the next budget, so the budgets are negotiated in the spring and approved by July 1st. They go by fiscal year. So the next budget that will be approved that will impact the next round of electeds will be July 1st, 2024. And that will be a budget that goes through July 1st, 2025. And the new council will renegotiate that budget as one of their kind of first orders of business in the spring of 2025.
Thanks, Jamie.
Thank you, Commissioner.
So when I was reading through the public comments, the other things I would want to know were around, I know I already asked about what is the percentage of the current budget. And I would be curious as if there's any, I mean, currently the 4 commissioners have between, it looks like 10 and 15 folks on their staff, and whether there would be a different allocation of staff, because it seems like the 2 biggest issues that we're pulling from the public comments were how are we going to, like, how much money is this going to cost? But then the second issue was also around making sure that the salary is competitive enough that it's not just going to attract folks that already are independently wealthy or retired or have the, the time and resources. So just balancing those 2. So I would be very curious as if there's been any discussion about how the 12 commissioners, how their offices are going to be set up, and whether that would have an impact on the percentage of the budget, but keeping those 2 factors in mind.
Great question.
Thank you.
Okay, great. If we could move to the next slide. All right, in your foundational documents, there was a proposal for the ISC that it would be led by 2 co-chairs, with the co-chairs essentially supporting, providing feedback to the team. In this portion of the meeting, we're going to discuss the commissioners' roles, their responsibilities, as well as discuss potential appointments for co-chairs. If you can move to the next slide, please. So I reviewed your survey that everyone participated in to gauge, who might be interested in filling the co-chair roles. And there were quite a few commissioners that expressed interest in co-chairing the ISC. And the other thing is, in one of the next slides, Jamie is going to walk through the work plan. In the work plan in April and May, it's focused on developing the methodology of determining the salaries, and in May, conducting the analysis. And in June, you'll be focusing on drafting recommendations, and in July, conducting the final vote. And this is, these are some of the co-chairs who had expressed interest. And we want to do a temperature check to see if everyone is comfortable with these commissioners to potentially serve as co-chairs. And then just talk for a few minutes. I'm not going to go through all of the information on the right, which is, what are your roles as co-chairs? But, given the breadth and depth of the information provided by the city attorney, I would really encourage all of you commissioners to think of yourselves as policy makers. In which case, your role is to, I am here to support you, to help you achieve the objectives of this work, and to collaborate, with the staff on the development of the agendas, provide guidance to your team. This is essentially your team, your staff, to help you gather information and conduct research so that you can ultimately, in August, set the salaries for the city council and the mayor and the auditor. So does anyone have any thoughts with regard to this, to the potential co-chairs? Commissioner Gill, please.
Yeah, I think that maybe I would not be the best choice for the June, July, just because I'm going to be away for 2 weeks in July. And so I will be in Europe. So I'm doing one meeting at 3 a.m, but I think that that's probably not the best choice.
Okay.
And and I'm going to be out away in the last 2 weeks of April. So while I'll be able to attend the meeting, our next scheduled meeting, I won't be available really until the beginning of May to start work. So that might make it pretty tough on Commissioner Engers, because I think they would have to pick up a lot of this initial work. So if someone else is available during that time period, I'm happy to let them take that particular slot.
Commissioner Martinez-Salastea?
Thank you. Actually, I had a question that might inform some of the concerns.
Please.
Perhaps Commissioner Gill and I can meet in Europe.
Oh, really? Okay.
At the same time, because I'll be in Italy. Maybe we could meet at Venice. I think that we can do that. But I was curious about any thinking regarding the background of the commissioners that maybe informed the suggestion of when and what body of work to move forward. That would help me make some decisions about it and coordination in my calendar. I mean, I'm going to be in Europe for less than 2 weeks, so I'm sure that I can accommodate that responsibility. But if there's any thinking about the background, I think that I would like to know. Yeah, it would help me.
Please, Jamie.
Yes, thank you. That's a good question. I did put together this proposal based on your survey answers and discussions that we had. Mostly what I was thinking about is that the months of April and May are really going to be about kind of research and those kinds of things. And there were, Commissioner Engers, for example, had not indicated that she was interested in a co-chair position, but was very interested in research and data. I believe that's what I saw in the survey. And so it seemed like a good fit for those 2 months to be leading on that work. The months of June and July are really about community engagement, about intaking feedback from the community, and about applying that to this proposal and leading us into a final vote. And so both you, Commissioner Martinez-Alicea and Commissioner Gill, seemed well suited for that position. So I'm not sure Commissioner Gill had specific community engagement, background, but you were interested in like doing spokesman type stuff. So it just felt like a really good potential fit there. Of the 4 that's listed here, 3 of you, Commissioner Martinez-Alicea, Commissioner Gill, and Commissioner Johnson, all indicated you would be interested in being a co-chair. And so I just tried to slot you in the best way possible. You also all indicated, even though you're traveling, that you were available for commission work. And so I apologize that I did not take into consideration your travel arrangements, but we could do some flippy-do and move things around, or we could certainly open it up to other nominations if this doesn't feel like a good fit.
Any suggestions or thoughts from the commissioners about either moving, for example, Commissioner Gill or Commissioner Johnson?
Yeah, we can switch. I mean, that would be fine with me if Commissioner Johnson is okay with that.
I think I'd still probably be more, I think my skill set and background is still more suited to the kind of planning work as opposed to the more public facing part of
Okay.
this. I'm just wondering if there's someone who would like to step in to my role rather than me shifting it around. I'm perfectly happy to step back.
Okay, so Commissioner Gill, if you would consider, we could move you to the April and May. And then is someone else interested in the June and July time period?
Now I feel bad.
I am clearly, though, I'm not on here. I did not sign up or express interest in this type of role. I, like Commissioner Angers, I'm interested in the data, the research, writing of the report. Those types of tasks fit my skill set. So I'm afraid I probably wouldn't be of much help or interest in the June to July timeframe. And I think you got April to May figured out, but if there was a situation where April to May was needed and somebody else wanted to shift, I could do that.
We don't necessarily have to have co-chairs either. It could just be a chair who's helping lead the work, although I'm sure she would appreciate the help. I just want to remind you that alternates can also serve as co-chairs.
Sorry, forgot to raise my hand again. I'm having issues tonight. Do you mind giving just a little bit more information about what the duties might look like for that second term? I know you mentioned community engagement and getting ready for the vote. Just wondering if there might be a little bit more expansion on that.
Well, I think it would be very likely leading on the conversation around, the community engagement plan. I just want to remind the commission that the community engagement part of the work will be a shared responsibility. It won't be the sole responsibility of co-chairs to implement. It will definitely be something that all of you will be engaging in once you agree on your community engagement framework, to whatever degree you will be participating in that. So I don't necessarily see the duties changing drastically from what you see on the slide. It's really just about the subject matter that you demonstrated interest in, which is why it was put in that position. But the work of implementing things like the community engagement will be shouldered by everybody.
I'm open to being considered for a co-chair, but obviously up to the group. Thank you.
That's wonderful. And you had expressed, I believe, an interest in engagement. So with that, it sounds like we have the following co-chairs for consideration for April and May, Gil and Angers, and then for June and July, Martinez, Salicea, and Commissioner Cooney. Any objections? Great, fabulous. Yay, hearing no opposition, it sounds like we have our first co-chairs. Woohoo! For at least for the first 2 terms. So that's very exciting. So I am going to turn it over now to Jamie, who's going to walk through our work plan. And now you can see all of the work that we're going to be rolling up our sleeves on.
Well, everyone, we have a very short 5 months to get through this body of work in order to vote on your final salary proposal before August 1st. So in order to achieve that very short timeline, we've already provided you with some draft thinking about how we might be able to get there in time. But this is really just a draft understanding of like what we think it will take, but anything is adjustable and adaptable. As you can see, we're already in April, so I didn't provide the work plan for before we were meeting. But from now until really early May, that first meeting in May, we want to focus and concentrate on setting that methodology. If we can get to it sooner, great, but I'm not sure. It might take a couple more meetings. We're already at the April 11th meeting and still talking about foundational docs. So it's probably going to take us 1 or 2 more meetings in order to really fully understand what data sets you want to be using in order to set those salaries, how you want to be setting that structure. Again, that's just early kind of draft thinking. And then really it's May through early June, that first meeting in June 13th, where you will be defining what that first draft of a salary proposal would look like. The reason we want to get to a draft salary proposal by June is because we want to have ample time for the community to engage in that draft proposal and provide you direct feedback so that you then can adapt and adjust that proposal as that feedback comes in. So you'll see in the June meeting details that once you agree to release your draft proposal, that we have about a month of community engagement worked into this plan so that you have time in July to deliberate and make your vote. You'll also note that in the July meeting details, we've actually provided 2 opportunities to vote. We just wanted to provide a little cushion. I will note that several of you have already indicated that July 11th is a really bad date. And so we will probably have to adjust the July 11th date, which again makes me a little nervous because it means how are we going to squish it in so that we have ample time for you all to make sure that you are ready to vote before August 1st. So 2 things that I want to make sure we come to agreement on today. The general work plan, if there are adjustments that need to happen here in terms of like times and dates, and like what you want to focus on in those meetings, we need to talk about that. But also, sorry, I think I just said times and dates, but also the dates. I want to kind of confirm with everybody that those dates work. And if they don't, what are some suggestions for alternate dates? I will point out that a couple things I want you to be aware of. The April 27th date is a Thursday, not a Tuesday. I know some of you don't think, or Thursdays aren't great, but I'm trying to accommodate some travel schedules. In May, the 23rd and the 30th, those are 2 Tuesdays in a row. So you would not get a week off in between. That was also to make sure we had enough meetings to deliberate. And I think that, oh, and the July 11th date is very problematic and needs to be moved. Okay, discussion.
I don't have anything on the books. July 25th could be a likely date that has a conflict for me. If that meeting had to stay, I'm sure I could find a way to make it work. but that date is just up in the air. I unfortunately don't have anything final yet, but I'll likely be out of town that week through that Wednesday.
July 25th, is that what you said?
Mhm, yeah, but all of the other dates look good for me.
I have a quick question. Can we assume that we'll be working on drafts? I mean, people will be sending out, so we'll be able to work in between in terms of drafts and making suggestions, or using our email rather than just being able to talk about things in meetings. I know it's kind of a naive question, but in order to support the work, it seems to me that we'll have to be able to make suggestions and editing and that sort of thing through our emails, not just when we're meeting in person.
I do not believe you can do any deliberations via email. So you could certainly offer suggestions and editing and send materials to me and to the staff team, but not to each other, right? Anything
Right,
time you do
right.
that,
Yeah.
that would have to be official. We
So if
could also, oh, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. So if we communicate, if we just send to all, to the group, then we could make recommendations that way, and we wouldn't be, there would be no meeting law or open meeting issues, because someone could get a record of whatever deliberations we have in writing. Is that correct?
You cannot send to all. You would not be able to send any commission business to more than 3 commissioners or 3 or more. So if we cannot deliberate via email, let's just say that. We can certainly, you can certainly offer edits or suggestions for research you want to see, or changes to documents that we may have sent out to you, but you cannot deliberate amongst yourselves via email.
Right. So I guess I'm still maybe confused. If there's a draft, so there's a draft recommendation that comes out in June and it's sent to us, we can then look at that and make suggestions or say, hey, could we move this paragraph to that place? If we send it to everybody.
No.
You cannot. Yes.
Okay,
Sorry.
so if we wanted to do that, who would we send it to?
So you're going to create your draft proposal. It's not going to be sent to you. You're going to be deliberating and creating that material as a public body. So you will need to deliberate and make changes to that as a public body.
Okay, so we won't be doing any written edits or anything like that. I still, how do we can't make any written edits?
Go ahead, Amber.
Sorry. So I'm going to answer this question really quickly, Commissioner Johnson, and then we have Commissioner Medras, Martina Telesay, and I believe Commissioner Cooney was going to put her hand down and then stopped. So essentially, Commissioner Johnson, based on the requirements around a quorum, you can't communicate to the rest of the commissioners. So the way that you will develop the proposal is as a body through these facilitated conversations. As a body, you will develop proposals. We will help you craft those proposals, and then if there are modifications to those, then as a collective body, you will alter, make edits as a body. Is that helpful?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if there's any work that we can do that is not in a meeting.
I would say that you can send edits to staff, to city staff. So you as Commissioner Johnson, if you have a proposal and you have ideas for adjustments, you can send those edits to staff. We would then collect all of that information from all of the commissioners and create a revised document for you all to deliberate in a public meeting about. You would
Okay,
have to make decisions about those edits together as a collective in a public meeting.
got it. Okay, thank you. That helps. I just was thinking, how on earth are we going to do all this with only, 6 meetings if we're only can talk about it? So I appreciate the clarification. Thank you.
We
Great.
can also establish more meetings if this doesn't feel like enough. I know it maybe feels like a lot and not enough all at the same time. But we do have the option of workshopping some of this stuff. And I think Amber may have some suggestions about that, particularly around the community framework as we move forward.
Yes, Commissioner Madras?
My question is more on the content of the work plan, if it's okay to shift there. I was wondering, it seems like the research is the first phase, which makes a ton of sense, but then we do more community engagement later on. If the community engagement brings up more topics that have research requirements, are we able to go back and say, now we know more from the community, we need more input on that? Or is the input truly only the first phase?
No, absolutely. You can make, yeah.
Go ahead.
Wonderful. Is that okay that I just jumped in because I saw the queue? Okay. I well, two things I'm thinking about the setting up community engagement. We are likely to need to create a calendar and outreach now in April and May, so that those events are happening in June and July, or rather in June from the 14th through the 27th. So that there would be mostly, then those meetings are not deliberation meetings. They're all structured to just, input for input and input. Am I correct?
You are literally speaking my language, and that is one of the last topics that we're going to talk about this evening.
Okay.
So could we
Yeah, we
all
can.
of your brilliance here?
Parking lot. Yeah, I can parking lot that. The other thing is that I want to also lift relationship building for decision making, the principles of moving at the speed of trust. So I am hungry for working from Oregon Food Bank. If I'm hungry, that's a problem. I'm hungry for being in community, because we all bring such different perspective and expertise. And when we build relationship, we identify who should I consult this with, right? So I'm thinking, we just had a presentation about, if we go to happy hour and we don't talk about the work, it's all good. But what about my tradition is that I host people, I feed people. So if you want to have Puerto Rican food, I'm thinking, we can have everybody with their computers at my house and, engage in that way. But I'm very, it just feels very disconnected to do this very meaningful work only in this format.
Mhm.
Yes, point very well taken. Again, can we hold that topic until at the end of the meeting? Because I think, and potentially for a subcommittee meeting, because I do think the suggestion that you just made is fabulous. Okay, on that note, if we could, we're running a little bit behind. If we could move Jamie to the next slide.
Well, I think we need to get a temperature check about the work plan are there any major concerns with this work plan, major suggestion for changes to this work plan? We have to maybe squish the dates a bit, but I need to see if there's any opposition to this plan as provided. Not seeing any opposition, and I'm seeing some thumbs up. So I think we're going to approve this plan, knowing that it can be changed in the future, but this is what we're going with. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jamie. So I know all of you have received your foundational documents. We're now going to go through the foundational documents. If you can go to the next slide, Jamie. So in your the meeting materials you received, there was information on the voting requirements and modified consensus. And this is just an overview of the modified consensus approach. Essentially, there are 4 types of decisions that you will be making through the course of your business. Housekeeping, which is everything from approving minutes. There will be process decisions, like approving the bylaws and creation of the subcommittees, for example, a community engagement framework for a subcommittee. And then, of course, the substantive portion of your work will be focused on salary adoption. And I just want to check, does anyone have any concerns, any opposition to these particular voting requirements? I know Jamie in the next slide is going to discuss the Pfister 5 method that Commissioner Martinez Alicea had brought up, which is a fabulous concept. But just in general, or is there any opposition to the existing voting requirements? And please note that using the modified consensus, and we're using a soft version of that this evening, which is essentially if there's no opposition, that the proposal is approved. If there is opposition, then we would do a roll call vote, in which case it requires a 50% plus 1, which is essentially 3 to pass a proposal. Any thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs up? Groovy. Ooh, I got double pumps. Thank you so much. All right. Jamie, can you go through the bylaws? Yay.
Yeah, so the next few slides you're going to see are our reflection back to you about what we received from your surveys, about your suggestions for additions to the different foundational documents. You received an adapted version of the bylaws in your meeting materials last week. There were no real suggestions for changing the bylaws except to adapt them to our work, except for this particular process of adding the FISTA 5 voting into your kind of process. The way in which I saw it working, and Commissioner Martinez Alicea, I want to invite you to participate in this, and correct me if I'm wrong, and please, you are the kind of expert on this particular model. But when reading the bylaws and when reading the materials that you sent, Commissioner, about the FISTA 5, it didn't seem like it was so much a voting method as it was a consensus building method. It was a temperature check method for us to understand where everyone was at. And if everyone was in a good position, like total agreement, we were at consensus and didn't need to take a roll call vote. In interpreting that, that's why I inserted it in this section of the bylaws as a method of modified consensus that still required us to take a roll call vote if necessary, if we couldn't get to agreement. I want to invite you, Commissioner, to maybe offer more information about how this voting method works and whether or not this is an appropriate application of it.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I actually use it for both temperature checking and for voting. So I think the temperature checking has come more easily, right, to understand from folks. But basically, the idea is that the majority vote is a constant challenge for marginalized communities. And the representation in this commission has replicated that very challenge that we often have in our community. So the problem with the majority vote is that then it basically guarantees the silencing and the marginalization of the concerns and ideas, etc., from less represented communities. So then this vote basically allows for a shifting of power that is not the power of the majority, but rather the power of the collective, where there's an assumption that when it doesn't work, absolutely doesn't work for one of us, it doesn't work for any of us. Yes, and that is a very challenging concept for many folks because it is completely different from more traditional ways of democracy and participation. But it allows then for a greater balance of power and decision making. So the way that I use it in voting is that there is the possibility of a no way, a fist. And that means that the decision cannot be made. So one person can stop the process. And that is the scariest thing for folks, have one person stop the process. I've been using this now for 7 or 8 years. And the fist has happened maybe twice. So most folks engage in the process by saying, I have just profound concerns about this, and I vote 1 so that I'm not blocking the vote, but it is then documented that there is a 1. And usually we do a temperature check first for discussion. So if someone says 1, then we go, oh, we need to talk again. And then when we're voting, then that person is saying, okay, I'm still having profound concerns, but I'm not blocking the vote, right? Or 2, I have reservations. 3, okay. 4, this is brilliant. And 5, this is the most perfect idea ever created in the world. So I reserve my 5 very, very much close to the chest. So that is how I use it for vote, and it's definitely very different. We are using it at board of directors instead of the Roberts rules, and we're using it at the director level at Oregon Food Bank and at committee levels and different organizations that I've been lucky enough to work with. And it,
Oh, sorry.
yeah, go ahead. That's it.
I have a clarifying question then. Which of these numbers represents a yes vote? Because we will have to distinguish on public record who voted yes and who voted no if there is a not agreement.
This is different. So a no blocks the vote. So no decision can be made.
So you are suggesting not a modified consensus model. You want a full consensus model, which
It's
means
closer.
one of the 5 voting members can block the vote completely by consensus.
That is my proposal to this body, which is very different, I know, and not based on majority voting. And I believe also this process is in better alignment with the spirit of the whole of the charter itself, which is to challenge traditional ways of decision making for greater representation of minoritized voices.
I will add before you deliberate on this that if the commission is interested in following the proposal as offered, then I will need to consult with the city attorney about whether it is legal to be applied. I'm not sure if full consensus is allowed on the public bodies. It's just an area that I don't know an answer to, so I would follow up and follow up with all of you and make sure.
Jamie, do you recommend that the commission deliberates on this now before seeking input from the city attorney?
I guess I would like to maybe practice this and get a temperature check from the commission using these models about how you feel about this proposal. And again, this would only be voting members of the commission.
So Commissioner Martinez Alicea has a proposal on the table using the FIS5 method. I would love to hear any thoughts, whether if anyone uses either the fist, the one, or the fingers, or simply opposition to the proposal on the table.
So in terms of process, what I usually do, especially with the Zoom format, is that voting members use the chat to say how many quote unquote fingers from 0 to 5.
Never access the chat when I'm sharing the screen because I don't know if you can see it when I hit it. Can you see it when I do this? You see, you can't see anything. Oh,
No. So does that mean they type in 1 or something like that?
Yeah, 0 to 5.
Oh,
So
okay.
let's say I'm a 4, so I'm typing 4, and now it's recorded that Commissioner Martinez Alicea voted 4.
Okay, I'm following now. Commissioners, we would encourage all of you to type your number in the chat. Okay, I believe those are all of our voting commissioners, in which case the proposal, because there was no, is the fist a 0? Okay, so because there was no 0, the proposal, there is no opposition. Is that correct, Commissioner Martinez Alicea, in the way that is proposed? Okay, I'm following. So, so Jamie, this proposal has passed.
I
Thank
will
you.
follow up with the city attorney and make sure that it's we can apply it. And if not, we'll talk about it again the next time around. I just want to ask, I know we need to move on. Were there any other issues with the bylaws as drafted and sent to you all last week? Seeing none. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, great. So I thank you for moving on to the next slide, the values document. So we have about 10 minutes to cover quite a few things. So really quickly, the values document, just so that you all really understand and grasp the values document as it relates to your work. It's really provides the values of you, the Independent Salary Commission, that you're going to use for the methodology for assessing salaries and ultimately setting the salaries. And here are some of the things that we heard from you. So for example, we heard some comments around adding more specific language around anti-racism, equity, and transparency and fiscal responsibility. And so I would say we have about 5 minutes. I would really invite any of the commissioners to describe how your work would embody, say, for example, the value of anti-racism for the first one and the second one, et cetera. And then if we can hear some language, then, you know, what the staff can do is take those suggestions and incorporate those into the values for then you to review for the next meeting. So I first see Commissioner Johnson, please.
Yeah, and I have just one, this is just more of a, it's not necessarily language, but I'm looking at the order in which these are listed. And I would like us to see fiscal responsibility moved up. I think certainly anti-racism and equity are important to have listed first, but I would like fiscal responsibility, particularly in light of the comments we've already received from the public, because a big chunk of what we're doing is setting fiscal policy. And I think it needs to be elevated in terms of the list of values. So that is my suggestion at this point.
Commissioner Johnson, just a point of clarification. So while these are listed in these are just listed based on, these were based on the survey. And so while they're in a list, are you suggesting that in the actual values document that anti-racism goes at the bottom and fiscal responsibility goes at the top?
No, actually, and I was looking at the values that were sent out, and there are several others that there was communication and collaboration. No,
Right.
I'm not suggesting that anti-racism goes to the bottom. I think anti-racism should be listed first, and I think equity should be second. But I think we need to elevate in the list fiscal responsibility, so it doesn't appear as it was sent out earlier. It's at the bottom, and it's at the bottom here. And I do think we need to reinforce that that is something that we are very focused on in terms of our work and our values. So that's the suggestion, not to lower the others, but to raise the fiscal up so that it's at least, so it's third.
Okay.
Because people do sort of sort of inadvertently prioritize things in a list unless you call it out and say, this is alphabetical, or you number it. It's automatic. People think, well, this must be less important because it's at the bottom. And so just from a standpoint of wanting to make sure everybody understands, we're focused on that, because clearly the few public comments we've gotten so far, initially people are focused on that issue also.
Got it. So your point is has to do with communicating to the public around the value of fiscal responsibility being important to this group. Got it. Okay. Commissioner, I then have Commissioner Martinez Alicea, please.
Yeah, I was actually going to say something very similar to what you just mentioned, Amber, that to differentiate between a tool for communications and precisely to reflect the concerns of the community, to make sure that the community understands how important it is to have fiscal responsibility. And then another, which is the tool of our commission, where all of these values, even though the sequential structure of language requires an order, that they're all held as equally guiding, and that we put into our to-do lists for outreach and community engagement the need that Commissioner Johnson is lifting, which is what tools do we need to make sure that the community knows that we are hearing the concerns and acting in alignment with those concerns that that are so much related to fiscal responsibility.
Great. I am going to recap those in just one moment. We have about 5 minutes. There was a suggestion just a few minutes ago about whether or not we could, if y'all were interested in extending the meeting for a few minutes. Are there any concerns around doing that?
Amber, I took a bit of an informal poll in
Oh,
the
thank you.
chat, and it looks like all voting commissioners can stay.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. All right. So let me recap the two suggestions from Commissioner Johnson, Commissioner Martinez Alicea. The first one was to move fiscal responsibility up in terms of the prioritization to communicate very clearly to the broader public about the fact that the ISC is listening based on the comments received thus far. And the second one, that all are held as equal in guiding the body of your work as a value. And I missed the last part, Commissioner Martinez Alicea, with regard to essentially tying that strategic communications that Commissioner Johnson had recommended as part of the outreach and the community engagement and strategic communications. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah, and particularly the need for the commission at that stage of the work to work with the communications team at the city to make sure that the information we spread and we share with the community do not give the illusion of fiscal responsibility as an afterthought, or the perception, not illusion, the perception. Because this, I think that what I'm hearing from Commissioner Johnson is precisely the concern that this is the few comments we've gotten are about fiscal responsibility. And we want to make sure that folks that engage in the civic participation do not feel that it is futile.
Yes, that's exactly what I mean. And I think it's particularly important given there are no budget figures that we're working with in terms of having a targeted budget that we then need to address in terms of putting together compensation, which is sort of an unusual situation in my experience. Usually you have some sense of a budget and then you're working towards developing compensation strategies around the budget, but that does not appear here, but I think the community will expect that in some fashion.
Okay. All right. So, okay, I think I got it. Were there any other comments from the commissioners about equity, adding language about livable wages that promote people from all income levels? Is there any specific language? Thank you, Commissioner. So I believe I had Commissioner, I don't know who was first, Commissioner Angers?
So when I look at the word livable, I mean, you see that with like, I would like to maybe see like a thriving wage or like something more than livable that would actually like attract, like not just like the minimum you would need to get by, but something that would be like attractive and competitive for folks at all levels. That it is livable, but also more than just livable.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, it's the precisely in that same spirit. So one of the things that I implemented at Oregon Food Bank is that at Oregon, particularly in Portland, a thriving wage is attached to housing affordability. That is a circumstantial variable, right? Because in other moments in history, housing was not the driver of either you make it or not. But in this moment, it is housing affordability that is most attached to livable wages. So that is what we have attached to our minimum wage, is then through the National Housing Affordability, I want to say association, but I might be wrong. They have guidance about what is housing affordability salaries in the region. And that's what we have used. But yes, it is more than just affordable, is what are the variables or the main variables that drive families and individuals to be able to thrive in a given community. So basically that could be part of the language of not just livable wages, but thriving. What does it mean? And in this moment in history in Portland is housing affordability.
Okay. If we can then discuss, did you have a follow-up, Commissioner Angers? Oh, okay. If we could then move to transparent, and then I'm going to review all of these so that then you all can consider them as a packet. Transparent. Portlanders understand why and how compensation decisions are made. I believe you made that comment. Is there any particular language?
No, as you can probably tell from the way that they're written, this was me responding to the survey. So
Okay.
wasn't suggesting any particular language around this. But just that was an important value to me, but I think it goes in with fiscal responsibility that and maybe you can put it under fiscal responsibility, that the compensation decisions are transparent.
Oh, I love that. Okay, so based on that, I have a few changes. One moves moving fiscal responsibility up, and that civic responsibility is an important aspect and value of the ISC. And then adding the additional language around thriving wages at all levels. And then we could add something like, for example, housing affordability. What do you think about that?
I think we need to be careful about tying our, I think we need to be careful about that one, just simply because we don't know what that impact might have on the wages. And there are a lot of other factors that we may need to look at. I think it's really important, but I think we can mention it, but we shouldn't tie it to any specific index at this point, because we honestly don't know what that might do. And we don't want to set up expectations so that people can look at that and go, oh, well, we're automatically going to use that as a benchmark, and we don't yet know what our other benchmarks are yet. So I'd be careful on that one.
Okay, so the proposals without the housing affordability language.
I think it can be aspirational, but I don't think we want to be, in my view, I think we need to be careful we don't tie it to a specific index or driver, and since we don't really know what those numbers are at this point.
Right. All right, so there are 3 suggestions. Are there any, does anyone oppose those suggestions if we move the housing affordability language? Commissioner Martinez Salazar?
Thank you. I love all of it. I just wanted to mention that we haven't talked about anti-racism language and
yes.
colonizing
Yes.
compensations. I don't know if you wanted to table that, which I'd be fine with, but just kind of lifting.
Jamie, how much longer can the commissioners go to?
It's up to them.
Commissioners?
Do you want to try for 8:30? And then see how far we get. Is everyone okay with 8:30?
I'm fine.
Okay, great. Okay, yes, let's talk about the anti-racism. Did anyone have any suggestions for language around the decolonization, compensation, and traditional structures?
We may need to add a definition as to what that means exactly, because I'm not sure that generally everyone understands that. So I think I would have to rely on Commissioner Martinez Alicea to kind of come up with a good definition of that for the purposes of this value. I think it's important, but I think we need to be, we need to help people understand what your aim is there.
Thank you. Yes, I think that maybe then based on that, I would say that maybe we need to table this so that we can have time to learn together. What are some of the frameworks that inform the decolonization of compensation practices? And I would be very happy to do that work, but of course, not tonight.
Yes. Got it. Thank you. Commissioner Akers?
One of the, I did a little bit of digging, I can't help myself, but one of the frameworks that I was reading about was using anti-oppressive pay instead of pay equity, because pay equity is based on existing structures. So if you're, saying like, oh, we're basing our pay structure on this other city, but this other city isn't paying equitably or taking things into consideration, and that's not actually fixing a problem. But anti-oppressive pay works to dismantle existing systems that negatively impact non-dominant groups. Sorry, I keep having this hand raising. Lower hand.
Okay, Commissioner Sampson?
Yeah, I just wanted to share like some experience that I had on another salary commission that I was on, and something that we may find when we start looking at other cities, or if we look at counties and just elected official pay in general, it can be very common for agencies to view this as part-time work and as work that doesn't replace a full-time salary. And that obviously limits candidates who are able to do the work. And I think that the city of Portland has not done that in the past. And it's nice that we all know these positions are considered full-time. And so we can, look at data and make decisions. But just in the places that I've sort of looked in Google searches, I think we're going to find a mixture of cities that pay the mayor $50,000 and $150,000. And that's going to be something that we need to keep top of mind. That external market data might not tell a story that lines up with anti-racism and equity goals of this commission. But I think it's something that we're going to see, and salary commissions across different states are working to undo. On the salary commission that I was on, that was something that we did after hearing from personal experiences of commissioners who had to work 2 jobs to support their families at home to do the important work that is definitely not part-time, but is full-time. So I think we're already in a pretty decent place going into it. But I do just want to acknowledge that some of that external data that we gather might not be in alignment And we will, just have to cross that road when we get to it.
Yes, Commissioner Sampson, Angers, and really Johnson and Martinez Salicea. Basically, what you all of you have just been discussing and describing is how you're bringing the values of anti-racism to this work. I mean, this is an example of the fact that, a few of you have done external research, you're raising the questions about how to approach the methodology. I just wanted to acknowledge that that's exactly what the values document is meant to do. So let me ask this question because it's 8:11. Would the commissioners allow us to take the feedback that we just received on the suggestions for edits for these particular items, and we can then revise them based on the feedback that we received thus far, and then in the revised packet for your next meeting, you will then see the edits based on these suggestions, including, I apologize, I don't know which commissioner said it now, it popped out of my head, which is we'll add the transparency language into the fiscal responsibility. Yes, any thumbs up? Y'all good with that? And yep, okay, cool. And then I'm going to move to Commissioner Johnson.
And I just want to make sure I understand our earlier conversation. So when we receive that information and I want to respond to it, I will send it just to Jamie, and then she and her team will then package it up and send it out to us as a group. Is that the right? Did I get that right? Do I understand what I'm doing now?
Go ahead.
You can include all the staff and the facilitators. You cannot include another commissioner.
Okay. All right. Just
Yes.
want to make sure I got it.
Yes, for sure. And then we'll packet it all based on, each of you may have other suggestions, and we'll packet it all up and then we'll discuss it at the upcoming meeting. Okay, if we can move to the next slide, which is the working agreements. Great. So in the working agreements, there were not, let's see, I lost my notes. The only suggestion was on 4A, and I can't tell what 4A was now. Oh, it was to prepare for the meetings ahead of time. So we will do that. Are there any other?
That language was already inserted in the draft documents that was sent. So really just need to make sure that worked for everyone.
Okay. Other than that, were there any other changes or additions? If not, we'll take a quick temperature check to check whether we're good to go on that, the working agreements document. Fabulous. Okay, great. The desired outcomes. Again, Jamie, I'm so sorry. I can't read my notes on this. Were there any suggestions for changes on this?
No, every commissioner highlighted a different part of the desired outcomes that they thought was relevant to the work, but ultimately all 6 desired outcomes were identified by different commissioners as being important and relevant to the work. There were some requests to discuss further, and so this is that opportunity. We did not pre-draft any changes because there weren't any suggestions, so you didn't receive that in your meeting materials. We thought we would just open it up for discussion here if there was interest in changing anything or offering suggestions.
Okay, great. So the last slide, and we can then adjourn. We have one more slide after that, which is the next meeting topic is the community engagement framework. And given the interest of the commission, a few of the commission members and based on, also Commissioner Johnson's point around the input and fiscal responsibility, I was going to ask whether or not any of the commissioners would entertain having a subcommittee meeting to discuss the community engagement framework in more depth, because I figured that we would run out of time. Are there any thoughts around that? And in which case, we can have we can reach, for those of you that are interested in participating in a community engagement framework subcommittee meeting, can you just, raise your hand and we will reach out to you. And, okay, we have Commissioner Martinez Salasea. Great, Commissioner Cooney. Just a point of clarification for you, Jamie, if we only have 2 commissioners, which is absolutely perfectly great. My understanding based on the bylaws is that would not be a quorum. Is that correct?
It wouldn't technically not be a quorum. I'm not sure we would need to set a public meeting if it was only 2. I will have to check on that and get back to you. There would not be, my understanding is that in a kind of subcommittee work session type structure, there wouldn't be any official vote taking anyway. This would be simply workshopping recommendations to bring back to the larger committee for approval.
Okay, great. All right, so if there are no other commissioners that are interested in the community engagement framework, we will work with you, Commissioner Cooney, Commissioner Martinez Salasea, and schedule that subcommittee, and then you can provide us guidance and instructions on the framework, because to Commissioner Martinez Salasea's point, which is we need to start developing the engagement plan now for what's coming in the coming months. So we'll work on that. Okay, I think we're about ready to adjourn. Next slide. Thank you, Commissioner. So the next meeting is Thursday, April 27th. It'll be a hybrid meeting that will also allow for public comment. And are there any additional research requests for the good of the order? If not, feel free to send. We have captured those requests from the earlier portion of the meeting, but if there are any others, feel free to send Jamie an email. Commissioner Johnson?
Yeah, just a quick question. How do you determine how much time to give for public comment? How does that decision get made? If there's, there might not be anybody, but if there is, how do you figure that out?
Jamie?
That's a good question. I think that might actually be a decision of the co-chairs.
Yeah.
So part of what I want to make sure you know is that, congratulations to our co-chairs. We'll be reaching out to you right away this week to schedule a meeting so that you can help us, structure the next agenda, respond to any concerns and help move our work plan forward. So that will be maybe one of the decisions that you'll need to make, which is how much time do you offer for public comment? How long can every person speak? Those kinds of decisions. And you'll need to communicate that to the commission when we return. I also want to make one more point. I see there's other hands about the hybrid meeting moving forward. In fact, it technically today is a hybrid meeting. You'll see that Liam is in the Portland building. All meetings moving forward will be hybrid, meaning we will be providing an in-person option for both commissioners and for the public at the Portland building on the first floor conference room. And so, you know, you have the ability to be in person if you want to in that room. But we do anticipate that in the future, there may be some public that attends there, and we'll be doing public comment in this kind of hybrid fashion. We're going to figure it out. It's going to be great and it's going to be fine. We haven't quite figured out the mechanics of it yet, but all of our commissions are hybrid moving forward so that we can be accommodating to everyone who wants to participate.
Commissioner Angers, followed by Cooney.
When you were asking about additional requests for data, I would love if the city had any data on that, like living, thriving wage idea about, you know, what it costs to have a like a quote unquote like good job, competitive job. Not sure how to phrase it, but a job that would be attractive to folks where they wouldn't have to work 2 jobs and feel like they could, you know, provide for themselves and their families.
Before I move to you, Commissioner Cooney, do you think you could provide just a tiny bit more context around what might be a competitive job? Or yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yes, I don't have all the answers, but I've seen different frameworks used, and one of them is that the 50-30-20 rule, where you're only using 50% of your household expenses or your like wants, needs, and savings, right? And so, like, what would someone need to be making in Portland to be only putting 50% of their salary towards their needs?
Okay, great. And Barb, that's something that your team can. Groovy. Okay. Commissioner Cooney, followed by Johnson.
Just a quick one, and apologies if this has already been addressed. Is the intention for the new commissioner positions that every position will be about equally sized in terms of the scope, the communities they're serving, or is that yet to be determined?
Jamie.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question?
Sorry. So I understand that the commissioner roles are growing from, you know, to the 12. Is the intention that these are going to be the same size just in terms of scope, communities they're serving, or, you know, has that been determined yet? Is that under consideration?
The Independent District Commission is currently deliberating those, and I believe one of their district criteria is that the districts need to be of comparable size in terms of population.
Great, thank you.
Yes, Commissioner Johnson, I know you had your hand up and you put it down. I just want to check
I think I might, I think you may have already taken care of it, but Barb, although we're not trying to peg our compensation to the city, do you use specific criteria now to sort of determine median income across the city, what that looks like? Are there any guidelines that you use, particularly for your non-represented employees, that we could also use just as part of our background information?
Yeah, we typically use market data. So our goal is to map wages to market, but we also look at our internal structure and you know, adjust our ranges based on, you know, the existing structure, and you know, attempt to pay based on you know, scope, responsibility, decision making, you know, and align that sort of relative to other jobs.
I think somebody asked this already, but are you gathering information on the council if they had taken the same cost of living data that the city employees received since 2019, what that would look like in terms of their compensation, since essentially they've had frozen salaries since 2019. So how far behind in terms of COLAs would they be if they had been able to give themselves the same COLA as the non-represented employees of the city? Are you going to, can you give us that information?
Yes, Commissioner Sampson asked for that data, so we will
Thank you.
provide that to you. Yes, absolutely.
Commissioner Sampson and then Commissioner Martinez.
I had one more question earlier that I forgot to ask, so I would love to include it in the information gathering requests for Barb and team. So the list that you compiled of comparable cities by population, I think that list is great because the populations are so similar to Portland, but I'm wondering if the same exercise, maybe a smaller list if there really aren't comparable cities, but if the same exercise could be done closer to Oregon, like maybe Oregon, Washington, and California, or more Pacific Northwest, just so we can kind of see the populations will probably not align as closely, but some of those cities that are below and above, but as close to Portland, would be really helpful for us to see and look at if they have salary commissions and what they're paying their elected officials.
Great. Commissioner Martinez, you put your hand down, so please go.
Thank you. So one of my questions is about very similar to Commissioner Sampson's question of comparable cities. I wonder if we could add a criteria about comparable cities or city governments that are more successful than others in being representative of their demographics.
Mm.
So that we add that layer of, what about perhaps compensation, and it could be something completely different, but perhaps compensation allows for a greater, more effective representation of the area demographics. I think that would be helpful to me also to feel like I'm comparing apples to apples instead of apples to oranges.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'm sorry, can you clarify that a little bit? So you're looking, when you say they're more successful than others, is there a particular, data point that we should look for?
Thank you. Yes. I wish I could be more specific than this, but the way that I would look at it is if their city representatives are close to, in terms of representation ratio, to the demographics ratios of the city or municipality or area. Is
And-
that helpful?
Hey, Commissioner Martinez, I think I understand the point that you're making. So can I mirror back what I think I hear you saying? And then if you disagree, please chime in. So what I think you're saying is that, for example, Commissioner Sampson, indicated that the requested information around the list of comparable cities and also like Oregon, Washington, and California, in which case the point that you're trying to make is that with regard to those comparables, also doing a comparative analysis between those comps to the demographics of that city, that then enables you to then determine those pay structures relative to the demographics. Okay, I'm following. Did you understand that, Barb?
I did not, Amber. Can you help me out?
Yeah. So essentially, Commissioner Sampson had asked for a list of comps for cities as well as a list for Oregon, Washington, and California. And whatever those lists are, whether it's the cities, the states, or whatever, to then compare those to the demographics within those same jurisdictions.
So when you say comps, or do you mean the actual wages paid to that particular elected role? Or
So
what do you mean? What do you mean by
if-
comps?
if there are, let's say there are 5 elected officials, then you can do an analysis of those elected officials of their demographics.
it.
You compare it to the demographics within that city or state or whatever. That's
Got
what she's suggesting.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I totally understand now.
You got it. Okay. Any other suggestions? If not, it sounds like our meeting is adjourned. Great. Thank you all.
Thank you all. I'll end the recording right now.
Thank you.